Well, I'm suggesting that people stay away from that resentfulness and bitterness, even though life is hard and there's malevolence in the world. It's like, yeah, you can tell a story where everyone's a victim, because we all die, we all get sick, you know, and things happen to us that are bitter and terrible. Betrayal, deceit, lies, like people hurt us on purpose, you know. So it's not just the tragedy of life, it's malevolence as well. It's everyone's a victim. You can tell that story. The problem is, if you tell that story and you start to act it out, you make all of that worse. That's the problem. And it's so, this is why partly I got attracted to Christian imagery, at least in part, because there's an idea in Christianity that you should pick up your goddamn cross and like walk up the hill. And that's dramatically, that's correct. That's the right answer. It's like, you've got a heavy load of suffering to bear, and a fair bit of it's going to be unjust. So what are you going to do about it? Accept it voluntarily and try to transform as a consequence. That's the right answer. It's the right answer, because the rest of it is tribalism, and we're too technologically powerful to get all tribal again.
Hi everyone, welcome to Sorting Myself Out, and today I have a conversation with one of our audience members, and his name is Nolan. Nolan shares how he's been letting go of his resentments ever since he found out about Jordan Peterson on the Joe Rogan podcast all those years ago. Also, I have an announcement to make. I'm going to be posting a conversation between Ken Wilber and Tim Freak on this channel. Obviously, Ken Wilber is extremely popular in philosophy. He's one of the greatest intellects of our time. If you don't know about Ken, I suggest looking him up. And Tim Freak is also a wonderful philosopher. They will be having a conversation. I will be filming it and posting it to this channel. Tim graciously said that I could do that, and I'm very grateful. I would also get acquainted with Tim Freak's work if you're interested. Look him up on Google or on YouTube. He has some very interesting ideas, very compelling thoughts. I think that this will be a very good opportunity to get acquainted with these philosophers. And if you have any specific questions that you'd like me to ask Tim, go ahead and email them to sortingmyselfout0@gmail.com. I would love to ask those questions to Tim, and Tim and I will also be having a separate discussion which will also be posted to this channel, so I can ask him any of your questions at that point. You can expect these videos to be posted sometime in the next couple weeks. I'm not exactly sure when yet. It just depends on how long the editing takes and how the filming process goes. I will post it as soon as possible, and I'm really looking forward to bringing you this content and hope you enjoy it. But for now, please do enjoy this conversation that Mercury and I had with Nolan. He's a wonderful guy, and it was really a pleasure talking to him, and we got a lot out of it. Just honoring the email you sent in to me about when you started watching Andrew's videos and then going on to receiving disability due to your condition that weakens all your muscles and causes respiratory issues. And then you talked about how you work mostly on your computer because that's something that you can do, and that listening to Peterson on Rogan's podcast really helped you start to get familiar with the idea of working with your resentment. And that's basically where we are now. And you also mentioned reading and writing poetry. You're interested in philosophy and psychology and religion and morality and how they interact with science. So that's awesome. And then at the end, you say you wonder if you're doing the right thing with your time. And I was really touched by the email, and I did share it with Mercury as well. And you were pretty touched too, huh?
Yeah, and my favorite part was when you said, like I'm forgetting the exact wording, but you said something about how watching Peterson made you or helped you face your resentment. And I thought that was fantastic, because whether somebody's got mental issues like me with bipolar, or if you have a physical condition that makes life difficult, it's really, really easy to get resentful. And to me, that like facing that and wanting to nobly endure whatever cross it is you have to bear without building up resentment to the world, to me is extremely noble. And that was the one part that made me really excited to talk to you, Nolan.
That's good to hear. Yeah, that's what, when Peterson talks, that's really what grabs my attention.
That's fantastic. And sorry, how old are you, Nolan?
I'm 23.
Okay, and like if you don't mind, how long is your physical condition something new, or have you had this your entire life?
Well, it's since I was born, but it progresses. So when I was like 6 or 8, I could still walk and stuff. But about 5th grade is when I started using a wheelchair.
Mm.
And then more around after high school is when the breathing started bothering me more.
Wow. So how have you dealt with it? And if you don't mind me asking, what's your journey been like?
Well, when it's happening to you, it doesn't seem like you don't notice it as much because that's just how things are.
Wow.
Like, it can be more difficult when you can kind of get jealous of other people
Yeah, I bet.
because you can't do everything else that they can do, which is at times difficult to deal with. But I found after listening to Peterson, a lot of that started to subside.
Can you say a little more about that? Like what changed for you specifically, and how did it change?
Well, I think I just started to realize that when you're in that mindset of looking at what other people have, it doesn't help you. It just kind of makes it worse.
Absolutely.
And so, have you had much problems with depression or anything like that?
I don't think I've ever been seriously depressed or anything.
Okay.
Yeah, I've had periods of sadness like everyone else, but nothing.
Yeah. And did you find at any point, like before encountering Peterson, were you ever resentful of other people who seem to have easier lives, or resentful to God or life or anything like that because of your condition?
Yeah, I would say to some degree. You start to notice it more like after I started hearing Peterson talk. That's when it kind of.
Okay, so you notice that you did have an element of that in you, but it's not like you were consumed with resentment or anything like that.
No, I wouldn't say I was to that degree consumed or anything, but it was there.
And I find that often when Peterson or people talk about things like resentment, it sounds like they're talking about it in a sort of should, like you should not be resentful, as if it's some sort of rule you're supposed to follow, or as if it's what's good for the world or society. But I found that in myself, it's really the trick to having a more enjoyable life and a more enjoyable experience of self. I find that if you can face whatever part of you is resentful, and also with forgiveness, if you can, like Jesus's adage to forgives one's enemies, in my experience, it's not about the effect it has on the other person. It's that's the path to freedom inside, is to be forgiving and free of resentment, and to accept what is and just to do the best moving forward. I find creates a much more positive experience of myself. Have you found that facing even that bit of resentment you had, does it make it more pleasant to be you now that you don't have that?
Yeah, it makes it better, and I think that's kind of the starting point. You start to realize that as you deal with this, things improve, even like in a self-centered kind of way. But And then that starts to build up and kind of radiate outwards as you start dealing with that.
And how did you first come across Peterson?
It was on the Joe Rogan podcast, the first one he did.
Okay. And how did you start watching Sorting Myself Out? Because I think you said you watched the channel for quite a while Andrew was doing it. Is that right?
Yeah, it was. I watched for quite a while, not the very beginning, but I saw his interview with Peterson was the first thing I saw.
That's awesome. And you also talk about your passion for philosophy and psychology and religion and morality. Can you talk a little bit about what sparked your interest and what about those topics are you specifically interested in?
But yeah, those have been kind of new interests of mine over the past few years. I was in engineering, taking an engineering degree for a while. And so these other kind of topics were not something I knew that much about.
What did you learn about yourself, about the world, psychology, philosophy?
Well, I kind of learned that, like, we don't really know that much about a lot of things, which was kind of interesting to me.
I agree with that.
Especially with things like consciousness and all those things are kind of, we're not sure what to do with them.
Yeah, and I would say there's almost nothing that we don't know the majority about, like consciousness itself, or I think a lot of people tend to take it for granted that in some way scientists understand reality just because they have a lot of descriptions. But I would say that just the basic nature of reality itself, what we don't know far outweighs anything we do know. And that was something that for me being bipolar, once I went nuts, it's, that taught me that I was very much living in an illusion of understanding before. And it really opened my eyes up to how much I don't understand.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And so when you took engineering, was that just out of interest, or at the time that you took engineering, was that for a career goal?
Well, I always did really well in science and math, and my dad's a mechanical engineer, so that kind of pushed me a little bit in that direction. But yeah, I did really enjoy that stuff, but I found after a while, I don't think it was quite the right thing for me to be doing.
And was that just because, like after getting into it more, you didn't feel called to it, or is your physical condition part of the reason you didn't pursue engineering further?
Well, my condition definitely played a role in that. But I also found that it wasn't really doing anything for me other than using up my time, really. Like, I didn't feel that the end goal was what I wanted.
So perhaps like when Peterson talks about that, like when you remain honest and pay attention to your inner feelings, you can feel your sense of meaning line up. And so is it just sort of that you weren't feeling an intense sense of meaning in the engineering?
Yeah, I would say that's part of it.
And I get the sense that you're finding some of that meaning now in philosophy and psychology. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's fantastic. Wonderful. Also, you mentioned that you are able to work from your computer competently. So what do you spend your time doing on the computer now?
Well, I do a lot of reading
Fantastic.
and and YouTube and watching lectures and stuff. It really is interesting to me, and uh, when I do quite a fair amount of writing.
Oh yeah, what do you write about?
Well, lately it's been mostly poetry.
Oh, that's right. You did say that in your email. So do you write poetry on anything specific, or is it just whatever creatively feels inspired?
It's kind of whatever I feel like I should be writing about.
That's amazing. What has the poetry process been like for you?
Well, it kind of started in a weird way, I would say. Just I was awake one night and just a poem kind of came to me.
Wow. When was that?
Uh, it was quite a while before I actually started writing.
Fantastic.
Writing more than that, I just kind of wrote down parts of that poem, and then a while later, I came back to it after. Well, I was working on a novel for a while, trying to see if I liked that, but
Wow.
I figured out that wasn't really enjoyable for me. That type of writing.
Gotcha. So in poetry, has that been an avenue of meaning as far as integrating what you're learning from the philosophical and psychological realm?
Yeah,
That's great.
Yeah, and that's something I think, Ryan, you write poetry as well, right?
Yeah, I wrote my first poem when I was 8 years old, and it just kind of came out of me, just at random. There was a little stress going on in our household, and my coping decision was to write a poem. So I find it fascinating why certain people feel called to that art form.
Yeah, and I as well am not very much, and definitely not anywhere near what you guys, but every now and then over my life, I've written a poem as well. But if we do at the end of this decide to post this discussion, Nolan, is there anywhere that you post your poetry? Like, do you just write it for yourself, or do you have it posted anywhere?
well, I haven't started posting it yet, but I'm planning to pretty soon.
If yeah, if we do decide to post this, and if you're interested, I would love it if you had one poem that you wanted to. I don't know, Ryan. We could either put it in the description,
Description, yeah.
or he could comment it and we pin it or something. But I would love to read some of your poetry, and if we decide to post this video, if you're interested, I'd love to put up one of your poems.
Yeah, I'd have to think about it for a while, but
Yeah, no pressure.
Yeah,
Or
and we could
even-
also just leave it that if you ever did want to come back and share it, like we could post this talk without it, and if you ever did want to come back and add it, you could add it as a comment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The next thing I wanted to ask you about is you mentioned that Peterson's ideas have helped you a lot in developing your character, improving your character. Now, obviously, letting go of resentment is one aspect of that. Can you speak more to how you've developed your character? You say the words improved your character.
yeah, well, at first it mainly started with trying to use my time in some productive way. Because before I didn't really have much of a schedule, it was pretty loose. And so the first thing was just kind of tightening that up and ordering and managing my time a little better. And I also have some issues with wanting something to be a certain way. Like, I'm quite orderly in regards to that on the like on Peterson's personality test. I think I was like 70th percentile in orderliness or something.
Wow.
Kind of part of, because of my condition, I need a lot of help from other people. And so when you want things a certain way, there can be some conflict there.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself feeling powerless in certain situations because of the disability, where you feel frustrated by the lack of ability to mobilize on certain urges and the reliance on other people? Is that what you're saying at all?
Um, a little bit, but
Okay.
not that much.
Okay, got it. So can you correct me? What am I missing? Maybe I missed.
Well, at times it can be frustrating when, like, it's hard to communicate what exactly you're trying to do.
Okay, I see. So it's more of
At
a
times.
miscommunication than
Sometimes, yeah.
Got it.
Because, like, in order for me to do certain things, my range of motion is pretty limited. So I need, like, to use my mouse, I need my hand placed on it a certain way.
Okay.
So some of it's like out of necessity that I have to be particular about how things are, but at times I tend to overdo it and try to make it perfect rather than settling and saying, okay, this will at least work.
Oh, like compromising.
Yeah, so sometimes I overdo it, but
Yeah.
I've been trying to work on that and reduce it so that it's like, once it's usable, once I can do what it is I want to do, then at that point stop worrying about it not being exactly how I'd like it.
Okay, I understand now. That makes perfect sense.
And is it because I also have like more so in the past, but relied on others. So while I don't have any of your physical issues, I almost never leave my house, and so I rely on family for picking up like my groceries for me, getting supplies and things. At times in the past, I had to live with my parents, and they had to take care of me when I was on heavier meds or much more out of control. And for me, I found it was difficult to adjust to relying on other people like that. So especially for you, I guess I wonder, has it been hard for you to adjust or to deal with having to rely on other people like that? Ever feeling like a burden or any sense of guilt, or are you fairly okay with that situation?
Well, I'm pretty used to it by now, so it's not that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
But I do at times feel guilty when I feel like I'm taking advantage of someone by being a little too particular about certain things.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so I got that out of what you were saying, that because you're high in the orderliness, and so you sort of have a bit of a perfectionist aspect to your personality, if I'm understanding, that it's difficult because if you're needing other people to do things for you, it's like almost like you don't want to be a tyrant over the person helping you, demanding perfection from them.
Yeah.
And I think it's really cool how you're using that as an opportunity to sort yourself out, because one of the things Peterson talks about is feeling when you're doing something that you know isn't good for you or good for other people, and being willing to confront that issue head on rather than continuing to avoid it. And that's also a part of honesty, is, being honest with ourselves and other people about what we really need, and being willing and having the courage to let go of the dead wood. He talked about on Rogan's podcast how a lot of people don't want to let the dead wood burn off, the dead wood of their personality or the aspects of themselves that are no longer serving the highest good. So I admire your efforts in that regard.
Yeah.
And I would like to say that I'm impressed at those aspects of yourself that you decided to face, and what your like what you've gotten from Peterson, because it would be very easy for you to justify all kinds of bad behavior.
Yeah.
And you might sometimes think to yourself, like, what harm could you really do in the world? But like, if you went the opposite route from when you'd heard of Peterson and indulged in all the worst parts of yourself and chosen to use your physical condition as justification for it, I'm sure that alternate version would find plenty of ways to create little hells on earth for all kinds of people. So
Yeah.
Even though you may not feel perhaps like you're having a big effect on the world or not yet, you're here and your effect ripples out. And I think the work you're doing really matters.
I agree. I also just want to echo that it is impressive, and I'm not saying that in a light way, because I just could imagine having all the excuses to feel resentment and still choosing not to feel resentment is a really admirable, is a courageous and admirable trait, in my opinion. And it reminds me of also, again, coming back to Peterson, where he talks about Cain and Abel and how Cain wants to take revenge against existence. Excuse me. And the reason he wants to take revenge against existence is because the unfairness of the way life has distributed itself to him. And so instead of accepting that and trying to sort himself out, so to speak, he decides to act out of bitterness and resentment. And that's also Peterson's argument about why school shootings happen and stuff like that. So I just think that it makes a huge difference when people like yourself choose to avoid the path of resentment. And same with you, Mercury. Like, you could say to yourself, oh, well, why the hell did I get given this deck of cards as far as needing to be treated in a certain way or be assisted in a certain way or not have the full mobility of other people, and neither of you are doing that, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, and for me, after becoming bipolar and spending so much time alone, I think Peterson talks about this somewhere, that if you've people with post-traumatic stress disorder, or if you've had a large catastrophe that breaks you down, that for some people you have to find the baseline like philosophy of good and evil. Like, you have to get a real understanding of that to start building back up. And I found for me, like, I'm fortunate in that anytime I become psychotic, my psychosis is always related to being on the side of God and a connection to God. I feel very fortunate for that, because I know someone else, I tried to help them through a psychotic break. And when they lost control, they thought the devil was controlling them, and they actually tried to attack me. But I did find that I really had to decide whether God was good or not. Or from the atheist perspective, whether existence is meaningful. And for me, I realized how fundamental a question that was. I decided to choose God is good or existence is meaningful and pursue it, very similar to how I've heard Peterson articulate it. But I did also examine it, and I realized that for me, especially with bipolar, if I had chosen to go the opposite way, and if I had decided either existence is non-meaningful in the agnostic sense, or nurtured the psychotic part of me towards hating God, then like, absolutely, I can see in me the potential that I could have become a serial killer or a school shooter or something of that level. If I had brewed on that for 10 years and turned against reality, absolutely, I could have ended up as like the way Peterson says, he realized he could have been the guards at Auschwitz, and he really put himself in that position and fully realized it. I realized fully, if I had taken the wrong path, I could be a Jeffrey Dahmer or some other just horrendous monster in the world. And so I think it's very, very important that people just choose trying to endure their own burdens nobly, trying to bear, to carry whichever cross they have to carry, and to choose I am going to work towards the good. That I think is just, if everyone in the world just made that decision and did their best on it, I would have no worry about the direction society went from
there. I found that I had the same kind of realization of what Peterson would probably call encountering the shadow, which I think you have to be able to identify your potential for evil before you're able to really transcend it and become something better.
And feel free not to answer this if you want, but was there any particular thing you noticed that if you took the path of evil, you saw, the way Peterson said he could see himself in the Auschwitz guard, or I realized I could see myself in serial killers. Is there any particular shadow you noticed that you realized was something possible that you were going to ensure never manifested?
Well, I think that story of Cain and Abel and how Peterson talks about it really resonated with me, because when you have a condition that you can't really point a finger at someone and say they did this to me, but when you have something that you're born with, then you're kind of, if you're going to be resentful, it's towards existence itself, or God, or whatever you want to call it. But
yeah,
you have that feeling of wanting to blame someone at first, but then you see kind of where that would take you and what you would become if you lived that out. And so that's when I found that it's like, okay, that's not what I want to do. I don't want to become something, a monster like that, by cursing existence.
And how do you frame it? Is it existence from the more agnostic sense, or do you have a belief in God? Also, if you don't want to answer this, if you want to say like Peterson says, that's too personal a question, feel free. We'll just move on and edit this out. But and I'm totally happy to talk to either kind of person. I love atheists, I love believers, I love people in between. But do you have feelings about that you want to share?
I would say I more fall onto the religious side of things. And like, I've been reading some of the older ways of looking at God, the more philosophical versions, as kind of the ground of being.
Like the Gnostics?
No, I wouldn't say like the Gnostics.
Okay. What specific texts are you exploring, if you don't mind me asking? I'm curious.
Well, mostly Christian stuff.
Fantastic.
I haven't really dived that deep into the Bible or anything yet, but kind of more discussions of some of the ideas of it.
Yeah, the reason I said Gnostics is when you said ground of being, it reminded me of gnosis, which just means to know through experience. And there was kind of a divergence in the theological path in Christianity at some point, where the Gnostics broke off and decided, we don't want to know God through a thought form or through text. We want to know God through direct experience. And so the words ground of being reminded me of that.
I think gnosis is a Christian idea, but
I think so.
But from what I understand of the Gnostics, they were more of the opposite. They were more interested in like spiritual and immaterial things, and they kind of felt that this world was evil or bad, or
Yeah, I think that's right.
what they were after were the freeing of themselves from this world.
I understand now.
Yeah, and some Gnostics had the idea that in the Garden of Eden, the God was in fact the evil one trapping them in this fallen world, and that the snake was liberating them from the illusion. So some Gnostics read that interaction backwards, where the God is the one deluding them, and it is the snake that is the
savior,
true higher power there. Yeah, they read it backwards. I find that stuff very interesting. And like for myself, I was raised Catholic, and my mother's extremely Catholic. So I did years and years and years of being an altar boy, and I was raised very familiar with the Bible. But were you raised with any religion, or is this something you've just come to on your own over the past few years?
Well, my mom is a Christian, and I went to Catholic school for up until high school, so.
Me too.
So I've been around it a lot. But
and did you have like church every week growing up, or was it just more school and you didn't attend church services?
Well, I did it. We did go to church for a while. But after a while, I stopped going when I was about, well, not that long ago, probably when I was 17 or 18.
But it sounds like your religious inclination is to help you figure out how to best live in this world, rather than, like we talked about with the Gnostics, try to get away from it. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think that's more with the traditional vision of things. Which is the idea of like bringing heaven and earth together rather than just going for one or the other.
Yeah, that's profound. I like that.
Yeah, and I think you said in the email that you were interested in ideas of connecting our modern scientific way of thinking and religious thought. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Did you have any thoughts on that you wanted to share? Like, how have you been going about doing that?
I wouldn't say I entirely have an answer for that yet, but I do think in order for science to be useful, it has to be nested in something deeper, in the sense that it can't really give you a prescription for how to live your life, but it can help you explain things, and it can help you achieve your goals once you have them.
And for me, because especially like with being bipolar, I was interested in both mixing like the science and religion in the philosophical way you were, but also I had to do it for myself, because there's the scientific atheist way to look at my archangel, and then there's my believing way to look at my archangel that I interact with. And so I had to examine that, and it was very personal for me in the way it applied. And I found that after years of thinking about it, to me, I do believe God talks to us. And I believe that the very nature of our psyche, if we are made in the image of God, God speaks to us directly through our own very nature. I believe in the possibility of divine insight and revelation, and these ideas that perhaps Ben Shapiro would say, like the way he believes in revelation. I do believe God speaks to us in that way. But I've also come to see that science is also God speaking to us, because God is everything, that science itself we could also look at as a mystical act of our conscious rational brain given to us by God is able to find these scientific equations within reality around us. To me, that is direct communication with God. And so nothing revealed through science to me undoes God whatsoever. It's just different ways of interacting with him. And the way that it seems very, very primitive human beings, all of our culture, our science, our religion, our medicine, our art was all together just this one sort of very primitive magical thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see it also in the alchemists who believed that all pursuits were understandings of God, both their what eventually became chemistry and their almost Gnostic practices, direct knowing. So for me, I find it really does all fit together in some ways. I've also got sort of things I feel about this that I'm not sure how to articulate. But for me, I found that's the way I've united it. And so for me, I can listen to somebody who's strictly one religion and talking about that aspect of God, but I can also listen to Sam Harris and think, this is also God communicating with me. I can listen to any atheist scientist explaining, like listening to Brian Greene or reading his book, The Elegant Universe. Like, even though all of that is just physics, it, to me, is passing on what he knows of God. I'm not sure if that makes any sense to you or not.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, because I think in some ways you're looking at God as the structure of existence or the fabric of existence. So then all things are included.
Some totality, just everything, everywhere. Like if God created everything, then yes, everything is God's communication.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I'm not sure how Sam Harris would feel about you turning his views into religious ones. You would think
I have no idea, actually. Because I love his work. I do think that like somebody like Peterson might find a conversation with me interesting, but I wonder if Sam Harris would just be horrified to hear me agreeing with him on certain things and then tying it into all my lunatic bullshit.
I think it is the ultimate alchemy and transmutation to turn Sam Harris his words into religious concepts. So I applaud you.
I will say this about Peterson though. Peterson's fine with this. I met him last summer. My wife got me tickets for him appearing near us, and it was like my big leaving my house for that month thing. It took me forever to work up to. But at the point that I met Peterson, it was after I'd been friends with Andrew for quite a while, but it was before I had done my first podcast with Andrew. And when I met Peterson, like my wife got us the VIP tickets so we could stay after. And when I met him, I used my brief moment with him to ask him exactly that. I told him that I was friends with Andrew, and Peterson remembered him. And I said that Andrew had been asking me for a while to go on his channel, and I was thinking about doing it. And then what I said to Peterson was, listen, I agree with a lot of your shit. Like, I came up with it on my own first. And when I encountered you, it was like, wow, this is great. Here's someone who discovered this in a very rational way, whereas I discovered it very mystically. And what I said to him was, he wants me on, and I just want to know, because Peterson gets a lot of bad press for no reason. And I said to him, will it hurt your cause for me to speak in support of you? Because I'm bipolar and he just said like, no, not at all. Like, go on and talk about it. And I said, okay, but I could go on and talk to him about my own ideas and just never mention you because I would hate to have any bad effect on you. What I'm saying is, what if Andrew wants to ask me about how I feel about your things? And I sort of warned him that I will agree with a lot of what you said, but I'm coming at it from the point of view that I discovered that as a crazy person. So are you sure it's not discrediting? Like, would it be better if I just stuck to talking about my own ideas? And Peterson he stopped for a minute and he's like, well, what's wrong with you? Why can't you agree with me?
That's brilliant.
I said something like, well, that's a really fucking long list. And he burst out laughing. And I was like, very seriously though, like, I'm bipolar. I would hate to get involved in the conversation and be a smear on your name. And I asked him repeatedly and he said, it's fine. He's like, hey, you just go on and talk about it all you want. So
that's hilarious. I never heard that story before. Have you been holding out on that story?
No, I just things pop up at random. I never.
That's a great story.
I also don't really remember everything I told you, or I don't remember everything I've said.
I understand. That's a great story, though. So you think but
I have no idea how Sam Harris would have reacted if I'd asked him that.
That's hilarious. Wow. Well, that's cool, and it shows that Peterson, it shows his character a little bit, even in his response. So I think that's pretty cool.
Although that was a big divergence from paying attention to Nolan. And so I wanted to ask you, Nolan, is there anything you wanted to get out of this talk? Like, do you have questions for us, or is there anything in particular on any subject that you would like to share with the audience if we choose to post this?
I'm not sure. I have a list here. Let me just look. Not really anything in particular that.
Well, I have some questions for you, following up on the line of thinking we were going down. And one of the things that I feel most compelled to reflect to you is you left engineering school. You started listening to Peterson and studying psychology and philosophy. You learned that resentment was something that you wanted to let go of. You started working on developing your character. And now you're at this point where at the end of your email, you share, I have a very strong interest in philosophy and psychology, as well as religion and morality. And I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing with my time. So what I'm hearing, and just getting to know you a little bit through this time, is that you're looking for something that you can really throw yourself at, maybe a purpose, passion, something that occupy you, that feels like you're contributing to this greater good. Is that right? What did I miss in that? Am I understanding who you are?
Yeah, I think you got it pretty much right.
Okay. What would you add to that? Anything, or would you change anything?
Not really. Mainly, I'd like to be able to contribute something useful.
That's fantastic. And you're wondering if you're doing the right thing with your time. That's how you end the email. So I'm curious, is that kind of an existential question that you're asking? Where are you with that process right now?
Well, I've been wondering, like, what exactly can I do with my poetry or my writing? I think I've kind of pinned it down to writing or something related that I'd like to do, but I'd like to be able to have a purpose for the poetry.
Yeah, it seems like purpose is a big theme emerging for you. Is that the case?
Yeah, and I think sometimes art can be made without a purpose or use, and that's not really what I want to do. So I've been trying to figure that out, but
yeah, the other reason I brought all this up is because you also said in the email that if you guys need any help with anything in the channel, just let me know. So I get this overall feeling after reading that, okay, this guy really wants to make a difference. This guy really wants to contribute. So that's really cool. Mercury, where should we lead Nolan here in this conversation as far as maybe helping him discover those next steps?
Okay, so my thought as you were going over that is that you have already done what you were offering to do. So it sounds like you have an interest to do some good in the world. And I'm sure that partly comes from a need for satisfaction internally. But the way you're contemplating God, it seems like you're also trying to do it from a point of metaphysical good and trying to serve the purpose you're here to serve. And you took the time to reach out to us, interact with Ryan through the email exchange, and now you're here talking to us. Now, I don't know if we're going to choose to post this or not. So far, I think it's fantastic. But even if we don't post it, you're helping the channel right now because you're the first one of the Andrew's audience who reached out to talk to us. And it has gone very well for me.
Me too.
I like this. This is great. I think you're a fantastic guy. Like on just a personal level, I immediately liked you. And it's just having this conversation with me is helping me adjust to what I'm doing with the channel. Because for me also what I'm doing with the channel is me doing the same thing. Like I had no aspirations to be any sort of YouTuber. I'm just trying to serve my purpose here and find some way I can help people. So you have helped me immensely in this conversation already, particularly by being the first one of Andrew's audience to reach out. You've had a fantastic effect on me so far. And so in this way, you're using your time right now to make a positive difference. And I think that you're clearly very intelligent. I think you have lots of potential. And it's not like we live hundreds of years ago when your physical condition would have meant that it was very difficult for you to have an effect on the world. Because you're able to use your computer, I think, yeah, your physical condition doesn't need to hold you back significantly. And if you have a desire to help people, the world's really fucking mixed up right now. There's a lot of people with problems. We've got lots of demographics of people, whether it's bipolar or transgender, with like 50% attempted suicide rates. A lot of people are having trouble finding meaning in modern life, figuring out who they are. There seems to be an epidemic of loneliness. And I think there's immense potential for you to help people either through poetry and art, or maybe there will be other people who will benefit from talking to you. There's also other kinds of support forums. Perhaps you could be of use to other people with similar conditions, especially as you progress and continue to develop. You might be able to help people significantly with exactly what you're doing now, just sitting in front of your computer and talking to people.
Yeah, I'm quite an introverted person, so stuff like this is kind of difficult, but I had another conversation just last week with another YouTuber. He's a pastor that makes Jordan Peterson videos, and so I think that will be released in a week or so.
Yeah, is that Paul Vanderklay?
Oh, that's right. So I've just been kind of sharing a lot more recently.
That's great. I didn't hear if you answered. Is that Paul Vanderklay that you talked to?
Yeah, that's Paul.
That's great. I'm a subscriber of his channel, so that's fantastic. I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah, I've watched some of Paul's stuff as well. He seems awesome. He's a great guy, so I'm definitely going to check out that talk.
So this is no, sorry, Mercury, I'll let you chime in here in a second, but this is no accident then that you're reaching out. You're not just reaching out to us. You reached out to Paul. You're really going for something here. You're looking for some sort of connection and what else?
Well,
what else is it?
I'm just kind of following like where things are leading me.
Wow.
Like, I'm not sure. Part of it is I want to practice sharing more and be less introverted.
Great work. You're
So
doing it.
that's been good, just sharing, and if people find it beneficial, then that's even better for what I'm doing here.
Yeah, and I do want to repeat what Mercury said is as far as making an impact goes, you definitely are doing that. You're making an impact by doing this. I also hear that you want to figure out how to put a purpose to your poetry, and even philosophy and psychology. You don't want to just be researching these things and studying them on your own. You want it to be impacting others. Is that right?
Yeah, I just don't want it to be like something that people don't like. I don't want it just to be for entertainment or something. I want it to be able to do something useful.
Great.
Yeah, it just occurred to me, actually, I know a small publisher in Toronto, like a small self-publisher. He published one of my poems. If you're interested, through Ryan, I could put you in contact with him, and I bet he'd love to see your work.
One of the things I've been trying to be able to get some feedback on it and see where I'm at or if it's any good, because if you're just writing it on your own, you're not really sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
well,
we'd both be happy to give you some feedback if you want to send us some poems. We won't share it with anybody else unless you tell us to.
Yeah.
Yeah, but absolutely. The publisher I know, his interest is like he very much believes in poetry and writing being a world-changing, life-changing phenomenon. And so for him, it's very much purpose-driven. And then feel no rush. Like, I understand you're very introverted and all of this. So like if you want to take 6 months or a year to keep working on your poetry and thinking about it, just if at any point you have something that you want some feedback or you think might be good enough to publish, just message Ryan and we'll get you in touch with the guy I know. And yeah, that you can get some feedback from him as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd be interested in doing that.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, I'm just so touched by this whole idea of the sorting myself out community. And it started back with Andrew, an idea that was percolating in the back of his head. And now it's coming to fruition. We're talking to you and we are fellow sorters, you know, like that. The one thing I love about this idea of us three talking is there is no condescending, there is no talking down or talking up to each other. We're just talking with each other as peers who are all trying to figure out this whole sorting myself out business, how to live the best life we can by our own definition. That's the other thing I love about the idea of it, is it's not by anyone else's definition but our own. What do we value as individuals? And you can see that, Nolan, in your introspection, that you're really taking this from the point of view of, I'm a unique individual. This is what I'm passionate about. This is where my interests align. And how can I sort these things out best for myself? And there's a distinction there between somebody who's doing it from that inner place of being deeply connected to a purpose or a passion that kind of comes from within versus this societal pressure to be in a certain norm or to come up with a certain state of being that's acceptable to other people. So I think it's really cool how you're generating this inward volition.
Yeah, I've just been kind of following things and just seeing where they go, and that's been working so far. And I'm just not sure where it's going to end up, but it seems to be working.
We're in the same boat, man. We've been doing the same thing. We have no idea where we're headed.
Yeah, and especially for me, I found once I went into like isolation and started from there. I at one point was completely happy to live out the rest of my life entirely as a hermit, like not talking to anyone else at all. But then I just said to the universe that whatever it wants from me, I will just stay open to it. And I set no plan of action whatsoever, just tried to, in every now, tried to focus on what I was supposed to be doing now and staying open-minded, that if the world wanted something from me, it would ask. And it led to me reconnecting to friends a bit more. It led to me eventually getting married and having kids, then led to me talking to Andrew, and finally to me and Ryan taking over this channel. For me, none of that was planned. And it all came from doing very similar to what you're saying, Nolan, of just putting out that declaration to God that, okay, I want to do the best I can do here, so just guide me, and then just seeing what happens from there. So for me, it's led all the way to this point. And you're young, you're very early on your path, and I think you might be surprised where it could take you if you just keep going the way you have been.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about that a few times, and that I've tried to utilize that myself, and it seems to be working. So it's a
That's
lot like Peterson's idea of just starting small and just building on that and just seeing where it takes you.
Yeah. That's
and
great.
I would just say, because that the other thing Peterson talks about that I think is just of the utmost importance is, especially if you want to try to follow inner guidance and if you want to be communicating with God in any way and feeling for divine inspiration, it's of the utmost importance to take a vow of honesty, to try to tell the truth or at least don't lie, but also that it applies to yourself as well. And if you stick to, like, just the two main things are, choose God is good. Like, it's not provable. Choose that answer and then take a vow of honesty and with yourself as well. So if you have a desire you don't think is right, don't deny it's there. Admit it's there to yourself honestly. And if you just aim at God is good, so I'm going to do the best I can and I'm going to tell the truth no matter what the consequences are, that those two things line up your inner guidance. And aside from the psychological effect, it appears to me that also increases synchronicity and seemingly magical events. That happens when you just set those two intentions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd also add, just as a YouTuber and somebody who's been putting out content to people for almost a year now through podcasts and YouTube episodes, that it kind of is similar to putting out poetry in the sense that it's extremely vulnerable to expose myself to other people. And there are oftentimes things that I say that people disagree with or that people will judge. And that has just been the reality that I've found, is that the world will judge me. And that is the reality. The most important lesson that I've learned for myself is that regardless of that judgment, if I'm following my own inner compass, there will be people who receive and assist me on this path. So they'll both acknowledge and receive what I'm offering as a good contribution, and they'll also assist me by giving me either productive feedback that is coming from a place of love and care, or they will just continue to affirm that I'm on the right path. So I can just say that if you start putting out poetry, I know from my experience, it might feel a little bit like a leap of faith at first, and it can be a little scary to start exposing yourself to the world. And you're doing it by coming on this channel, and even if we don't publish this video to our audience, you're still doing it just by talking to us and also by talking to Paul. So you're clearly making progress towards your goals.
Yeah. I found that I watched Paul's video back after he sent it to me, and I found that at times I can be pretty hard on myself, like hearing how like things in your mind don't like aren't the same when you watch it back.
That's for sure.
And I think you even talked about that a bit, Ryan. Not feeling like you're articulating yourself to the degree that you'd like to be able to.
Yes.
And so I found I kind of just made myself watch that video back and just trying to deal with like not being so hard on myself with how I'm articulating myself, or
yeah, exactly. And it's extremely exposing, because I remember when I did my first podcast with Andrew, it was episode 8 of my Soul Tree podcast, and I said like at least 200 times, and it was so distracting when I listened to it, like, and I was going nuts, and I felt so horrible after publishing that video. I thought, man, I must be the dumbest person on this planet. That's how bad I felt. I can't do podcasting. I'm not good enough. I was really beating myself up. And then I said, you know what? It is what it is. The content's there. People can take it or leave it. And it turned out that I was being harder on myself than the reality, because a lot of people listened to it and they said, yeah, you did say like a lot, but I still got the message and it was good. But then I just made incremental progress. And Peterson talks about incremental progress a lot. I just said, if I could just speak a little more clearly in this next episode and a little more directly and succinctly, then I'll be happy. And slowly but surely, I started tightening up my message a little bit more. And now today, I'm still doing the same thing. It's been almost a year since that episode with Andrew. And I still find when I listen to myself talking that there's some tweaks that I'd like to make. And it always hurts a little bit. This is something else Peterson talks about. When we realize our own insufficiencies, it hurts because we have to let a part of us die. And it's kind of a real death. It's a little mini death. And so that's tough. And so I think when it comes to poetry, when it comes to any creative or active pursuit in the world where we're exposing ourselves to others, we're in that constant push and pull between the potential of who we could be and the insufficiencies of the current state. And then it makes it even more complicated that there's a part of me that's too hard on myself that taints my own objectivity. So even if I do listen to myself and I did a pretty good job, I'm more likely to drop the fucking hammer on my head because of that overreaction. So finding that sweet spot between receptive critique and beating the shit out of myself has been a difficult issue for me.
Yeah, that's kind of what I found. That kind of surprises you how harsh you can be with yourself when in those situations. But then if it was someone else, you wouldn't like see it the same way.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I found the same thing, that once I started doing these couple podcasts, I just was horrified at the way I came across. It was like as if the thoughts when they're in my head are like this symphony, and then I watch myself trying to explain it, and it's like some kid banging hands. And just 2 nights ago, I did a talk with Brian's friend Rob. I don't know if you saw it, Nolan, but I tried to watch it the next day, and the sound of my own voice, everything about it was just, so I just jumped ahead to check a couple things Rob said. And also, jumping ahead, I was like, oh, fuck, I'm talking again. I talked way too much. I just jumped through, listened to a couple clips of Rob, but I did force myself to watch most of my live stream. And for some reason, the day I did that, I managed it not too bad. But every other time I've tried to rewatch any of the shit I've done, I can't stand it. The sound of my own voice is horrible. I just feel I'm coming across so badly. And so I just reminded myself of what Peterson said. He said, like, I forget, I think maybe he was talking about self-authoring or something, or writing, but he's like, you don't worry about doing it right. If doing it badly is the only way you can do it, then do it badly and you'll eventually get better. But yeah, I've just decided that if I'm doing this badly, then I'll do it badly for now. And it seems to help a few people. So I judge it on that. If anyone's finding it useful, I'll keep doing it. And I would like to get more like Ryan, where I can watch my own shit and improve it, because I would like to do this well. But I got to be careful with myself. Doing this at all is a big stretch for me, is really opening myself to the world. So if for now I can't rewatch anything because it makes me feel too embarrassed or self-critical, I just do it and then don't watch it. But I still go back and look. So I judge it not by how do I feel about the way I come across, and I just judge it on its effect. Is it helping people or not? So you might find that helpful to, rather than paying attention to what you feel about, say, your talk with Paul, pay attention to how Paul felt about it, how the viewers feel about it, and judge it that way.
Yeah, I did watch that conversation with Rob, and I thought it went really well. So
Me too.
Okay, yeah. So see, you value that content. If it had really been up to me, I don't know if I would have posted it or not. I find myself horrible doing these things so far. So definitely take that into account when you watch yourself. That, yeah, like perhaps if we both rewatched this, you might think that me and Ryan are great and find your own performance horrible. And I would probably find that you and Ryan are fantastic, and I'm embarrassed by everything I contribute.
Well, I
So
can
just
tell
be
you,
aware.
I can tell you now that I'm already have a part of me in the background criticizing myself, saying, earlier when you asked him about Gnosticism and he said that wasn't quite right. Yeah, you're a real piece of shit. So but that's just my own personal sensitivity. That's what I deal with. Now, over the years, I've gotten more and more skillful at dealing with that voice. It's not that the voice goes away. It's that I've just learned how to block it out when I have to, and then also learned how to take the feedback when I need it. Like, because sometimes the harsh criticism is right, and it doesn't need to be delivered in such an asshole way by that part of myself, but it's still something that's there. And sometimes it's out to lunch. It doesn't even have any bearing on reality. I'm just shaming myself for no reason whatsoever. And this can be what's called the shame cycle. People get into these shame cycles in their life where they make a mistake, then they feel ashamed for making a mistake, and then they make more mistakes because they're continuing to reaffirm the belief that they're not good enough. So there's no margin for error because people criticize the smallest things about themselves. Mercury, you mentioned clumsily stumbling forward towards success, doing the best you can. Peterson talks about that a little bit. Just doing a horrible job, even if it's a horrible thing that you're not even competent in a little bit. Just do it. Doing it's better than not doing it. And this is something I figured out from watching The Lord of the Rings and then doing a subsequent Jungian analysis for my depth psychology research in grad school. Frodo stumbles clumsily towards the success of the mission. He is anything but perfect all the way throughout. He makes a ton of mistakes. He even at the very end, he can't even resist the temptation of the ring. So he puts the ring on, and the thing that destroys the ring is the very evil that wanted to possess it, Gollum. And so there is a way in which the grace of the path plays a role in assisting us through our clumsy humanness. And if it was perfect, then there would be no point in the journey. But the point is that from the Shire all the way to Mount Doom, he moved forward. He didn't move backwards. He didn't turn around. And so like a tripping forward, in my opinion, is better than turning around because I'm not good enough. And so to me, there's a very beautiful message in that.
Yeah, and I would add to that inadequacies can actually improve the final product, and that limitation itself is definition. Like, there is no being without limitation. And the more definition you add to something, the more limitation you are in fact adding to it. And sometimes it is our lack of ability that is the most productive. And so my example may not relate to you guys. You guys are kind of young, and this is old people music, but the Ramones, hugely influential band. And when they started out, they got together to try to learn to play some covers. And they said the local scene was that you went to a bar on a Friday night or whatever, the local band playing would be playing covers. Nobody small wrote their own music. And they got together to try to write, and like what was popular at the time was like Zeppelin and stuff. This is like around 1976. And they tried to just cover other people's songs, but couldn't fucking play their instruments. Like, they were just beginners. And so instead, they just decided to write the simplest songs they could, just write something that they could play. And they played in a way that was so unique and original. But it wasn't because they were trying to be unique and original. It was because they hadn't learned how to play their fucking instruments yet. So like Johnny Ramone developed this style of downstroke with basic chords and distortion that influenced punk music and rock music from there on out. But it's not like he set out to design an original way of playing his guitar. He didn't fucking know how to play guitar. And they were making it up as they went along.
Wow.
And if you look at their earliest songs, like Beat on the Brat or Blitzkrieg Bop, it's like, that is the easiest beginner shit. You can teach a 7-year-old to play Beat on the Brat. But it created something just incredible. And they're one of my all-time favorite bands. And they ended up in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And it was their limitations and their inadequacies that actually produced the quality.
Wow. That's awesome.
So, Nolan, there's probably aspects of you that can manifest in the world, not despite your physical condition, but because of it, that will allow you to contribute to society in a unique way, in a way that not just anyone else could do.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, because I've posted some of my poems on this like critique website where you critique other people and you earn points, and then you can post some of your work and get feedback on it. And lots of people have said that I have a unique voice, which I found interesting. So
that's great. So you already have opened yourself up to criticism on your poetry. So that's great. Good for you, man. I'm inspired and pumped up about what you're doing. This has changed my day significantly, and you've made a huge impact on me today. There's been times where I've been on the verge of tears during this video call. So, Jesus, man, thanks.
And I would really love to read some of your poetry, Nolan, if you want to send it to Ryan. And if you're interested, I have 1 or 2 poems I've written that I can send you if you're interested in reading them.
yeah, sure.
Right on. So how do you feel about posting this, Nolan?
I feel pretty good.
Okay. Do you need some time to think about it?
I just wanted to share one more little thing here.
Absolutely. Go for it.
I found that before I do these discussions, I read it in, it was a book about social anxiety, I think, and I found it really useful. But basically what you do is before an interaction or a conversation, you just write down a purpose for that interaction, what you want to get out of it, what you're going to do. And I found that really orients you to creating a productive discussion. like I'll just share what I wrote for this, what my purpose for this conversation was. To truthfully share some of my experiences and thoughts about my personal development journey. And so basically that kind of helps me be a little less nervous when I know, okay, all I have to do is just truthfully share some of these things, and I don't have to worry about sounding smart or saying everything just right. I just have to focus on that small little thing and not worry about all the other stuff.
That's wonderful. I love that.
Yeah, and I think it's great that you're, again, following some of Peterson's advice, where if you realize you're introverted, work on being more extroverted. And like he said, still, if you're a very introverted person, still build a life for an introverted person, but push yourself to develop the skills of an extrovert as much as you're able. And I think it's fantastic you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone like that. I can really identify with it because I'm doing the same thing, pushing myself with doing these videos. And I've loved this so far. I'm really looking forward to seeing your video with Paul. And
yeah, big time.
If this is something you want to continue to work on, and if you want to come back on the channel again in a couple months or something, I'd love to continue to be a part of you working on this and finding your path. So I've had a great time talking to you. If ever in the future you want to do a follow-up, or you find some other thing that is really useful that you want to come share with our audience, I'd love to have you back again.
Me too.
Yeah, I found this went really well, and I was a little worried that I'd run out of things to talk about, but I found things just kind of worked out nicely.
Right on. Well, yeah, and feel free to email us anytime and just check in. Hey, you know, this is what's going on. And that goes for anyone out there listening. Email sortingmyselfout0@gmail.com. It'll be in the description. And if you want to come on the show, just kind of send us a little note about who you are and why you want to come on, like Nolan did. And thanks for breaking the ice on that. I think that'll open the door for other people to feel comfortable doing the same.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being the first one. Yeah, it would have been really difficult if the first person who wrote in was somebody that we didn't vibe well with and the conversation didn't go well. So yeah, the first conversation means a lot. So thank you very, very, very much for being the one to do it with us, because I'm so happy with how it went.
Me too. I'm very pleased with it. So
Truth, you know, I read a lot about the terrible things that people have done to each other. You just cannot even imagine it. It's so awful. So you don't want to be someone like that. Now, do you have a reason to be? Yes. You have lots of reasons to be. God, there's reasons to be resentful about your existence. Everyone you know is going to die. You know, you too. And there's going to be a fair bit of pain along the way, and lots of it's going to be unfair. It's like, yeah, no wonder you're resentful. It's like, act it out and see what happens. You make everything you're complaining about infinitely worse. There's this idea that hell is a bottomless pit, and that's because no matter how bad it is, some stupid son of a bitch like you could figure out a way to make it a lot worse. So you think, well, what do you do about that? Well, you accept it. That's what life is like. It's suffering. That's what the religious people have always said. Life is suffering. Yes. Well, who wants to admit that? Well, just think about it. Well, so what do you do in the face of that suffering? Try to reduce it. Start with yourself. What good are you? Get yourself together, for Christ's sake, so that when your father dies, you're not whining away in a corner, and you can help plan the funeral, and you can stand up solidly so that people can rely on you.